company. On behalf of Rangila, I welcome you all for Rangila Youth Empowerment Faculty Certification Program. The agenda for today's session is same. Our session will be kicked off by Mrs. Shanmugapriya, followed by the moderator. The moderation introduction will be there. After which the feature presentation will go on. We will have the question answer session in the end. Maybe before 10 minutes of the Q&A session, the participants can give their questions, and those who have an interactive session, they can raise their hand as well. Mrs. Shanmugapriya, who is the principal of SBK Vidyashram Senior Secondary School, Tirchangol, Tamil Nadu, will kickstart our session. She is a recipient of Best Principal Award, and she is also the founder of SKV Online Academy, and she has organized and led many social and environmental awareness campaigns. Ma'am, thank you so much for being here. It's a privilege to have you here. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to thank Rangila team to given this opportunity. Good evening, all. Welcome to today's section. Hope you are doing well. Glad to introduce and kick off this section. It's section 2, part of 5-week series. National Education Policy 2020 proposed changes in curriculum, content, and pedagogy. Faculty role is more challenging now. New environment, we have to develop and update more skill sets. Rangila, US-based startup, focus on whole child development product. This product includes cognitive development, career development, and natural talent development. Rangila Whole Youth Certificate 5-section program is designed to prepare and update faculties for NAP 2020. This program updates as child cognitive development stages, recent neuroscience research updates, and exploring talent-based youth development. Today's section is to focus on children age 11 and above. Holistic development of cognition is pre-adolescent and adolescent. Today, the presenter is Agila Sadasivam. She is cognitive neuropsychology practitioner over 20 years in Bangalore. Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Yashwant Vasudevan, our section moderator, who will moderate the section with Mrs. Agila. Mr. Yashwant Vasudevan is a director, principal of Dr. KJG School, Ooty. He is enthusiastic director, principal with superb leadership and communication skill. Founder, principal of SKV Vidyashram Senior Secondary School. Youngest principal awardee for taking the role of principal at the age of 25. Youngest entrepreneur awardee for establishing the own school at the age of 30. Now I request Mr. Yashwant Vasudevan to take over the section.
Thank you, ma'am. So this is Yashwant Vasudevan. I'm here to be a moderator of today's session. So here it is. So we have Rangila coming up with a series of session, a 5-week session. Like they have introduced already module 1, where we had Mr. Padmanabhan and Agila Sadasivam explaining the neuroscience behind children aged 6 to 10. So here, today's session would be about NAP 2020 faculty preparation series, Rangila Youth Empowerment Faculty Certification Module 2, experimental or experiential learning, what is crucial for the holistic development of cognition in pre-adolescence and adolescence. So before going to the session, I would like to place on record my sincere appreciation to Team Rangila for arranging and engaging sessions like this, where Rangila is basically an US-based startup Rangila Artificial Intelligence powered 100% youth development analytic platform. They are into providing cognitive development, identifying natural talents, and also like helping with career planning and guidance. Thank you, Team Rangila. Now, I would like to introduce the aim of the session to every participant here. So all teachers, educators, and facilitators, the very aim of this session is to identify the immense role teachers play in facilitating, promoting, and accelerating holistic development of cognitive capacities in pre-adolescence and adolescence. So cognition, in the sense here, it relates to thinking, remembrance, reasoning, and decision making. So let us kind of look at the topic, experiential or experimental learning. What is crucial for the holistic development of cognition in pre-adolescence and adolescence? Before getting into the topic, it should be kind of easy for every one of us if we get to know what exactly is experiential or experimental learning. So here I would like to introduce experiential and experimental learning. Most of our teachers would have been doing this in our classrooms, but still, we wouldn't have clearly understood what experiential and experimental learning is. The definition of experiential learning is that process of learning through experience. In other words, learning through the reflection on doing. So this is completely related to the experience that an individual gains. On the other hand, we have experimental learning. Experimental learning is nothing but the process of learning through experiment. In other words, we call it as practical or on-site learning. See here, much of practice is being given to the learner, whereas experiential learning, it depends on the sole individual experience that a learner comes across in his life. Fine. With that, I would like to give more of examples or more of core elements of experiential and experimental learning in order to understand the concept, the topic better. So the core elements that affect experiential learning and experimental learning. So looking at this, both experiential and experimental learning consider a learner as an individual. It is not as a group. It gives individual attention. Out of all the learning pedagogies, learning theories, learning styles that we have, this experiential and experimental learning is child-centric. So these two learning pedagogies are being considered as the best learning pedagogies that always focuses on the learning of the child. The individual learner. So here, we do have collaborative learning, we do have kind of learning by doing, we do have hands-on activities, or we do have reflective learning. So all such kind of learnings come under any of these experiential pedagogy or experimental pedagogy. And that is why this topic has been chosen for today. So experiential learning, let us look at experiential learning. Learner as an individual, as a center, we do have 4 elements that affect experiential learning. See, the learner as an individual gets a concrete experience and he or she reflects upon that. With that, he or she comes to an abstract conceptualization, and then he or she applies that in their day-to-day life. Let us consider cooking as an example. See, I'm very particular in not being gender-based. Let it be a boy or a girl at home, observes his mother cooking or his or her mother cooking at home. That is the concrete experience that he gets, in a natural way. So there is no controlled, kind of situation there. So in a natural way, when a learner gets such kind of experience, see, he observes, and then he reflects on what all his mother did. And then, the conceptualization comes into place where this is an abstract conceptualization. So for this abstract conceptualization, the learner uses his analytical abilities in order to conceptualize what did go in, what was the first thing his or her mother did, and then what is the next one and what is the next one. So consider taking, preparing one particular dish. And then, he uses all these ideas, he uses this conceptual ideas, and then he applies in his real life where he starts preparing, he starts cooking a dish. So this happens in a natural experience. This happens in a natural environment where there is no much of control. So the learner, has got enough freedom. So where it depends on his individual experience. So experiential learning is all about an individual's experience, where the learner has enough freedom. So the learner has all free hand to learn things. And then, like the learner has except for these four core elements, these four core elements will make that experience a genuine learning. Got that? Like now we consider experimental learning. So experimental learning again is a child-centric learning pedagogy, where like the teacher plays the vital and major role. So here there comes teacher. So when we consider an experiment, like we always have procedures, we always have materials required, we always have an aim to that and all. Like we always have resources for that. So here the teacher plays the vital role, and the situation is very much controlled, where the teacher provides resources, or the teacher asks the learner to bring resources for that. So here like there is theory and concept which beforehand, before the child goes on to the training, like is being taught, not as a whole, but like a part of theory and the concept is being introduced to the child. And like this is much of an outcome based learning. Like the teacher as the facilitator here knows like what should be the outcome, and the outcomes are clearly fixed. And then like this is also being evaluated, and the teacher evaluates it, and then the feedback is being provided to the child. So here again like learner becomes the center of the pedagogy. So now let us take up the same cooking example. So imagine like the learner enrolls himself for a course in catering. So there like the first and foremost thing he comes across is a teacher. Like the teacher has the curriculum with them. The teacher has resources with provided to the child or to the learner. And then like theory and concept is being taught, and then like he is being given outcomes, and then like he is also being evaluated. So any particular dish is being given like in equal proportion. The ingredients is also being provided. Like the child does a practice on that. Like hands-on training is being given to the child, where the situation is much of a controlled one. So learning happens these both ways. So out of all learning pedagogies, so we can undoubtedly vouch for experiential and experimental learning, calling it as the 20th century learning, like the need of the hour, the call of the day. So both pedagogies invariably discourage rote learning and encourage hands-on activities. So that is what as teachers we are looking forward for. Like as John Dewey said, like if we teach today's students the way we did yesterday, we rob them of tomorrow. Like there is a shift that is required in teaching and learning practice that is happening across the globe. Fine. So now comes the big question. Having clearly learned what is experiential learning and what is experimental learning, the biggest question to the teachers, like you as teachers, which pedagogy do you think is crucial for the holistic development of cognition in pre-adolescence and adolescence? So pre-adolescence and adolescence, in the sense, like children studying from 6th standard to 12th standard through middle, high and higher secondary classes. So which pedagogy do you now think is crucial for the holistic development of cognition? Do you vouch for experiential or do you vouch for experimental? Like you would have taken a stand by now, but still, like teachers would be in a big dilemma, like which one to support, like whether you call experiential as the best learning pedagogy or the other pedagogy as the best one. So now, what basic knowledge should a teacher or educator gain apart from his or her subject to understand this better? So to understand whether experiential works better or experimental works better. So what is the basic knowledge other than your subject you and I had to learn? Is that neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience. So neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience. Neuroscience is the study of brain and nervous system, and cognitive neuroscience is a branch of neuroscience that actually deals with the biological process of the nervous system, which forms the basis of cognitive functioning. So here cognitive functioning again, like would like to highlight thinking, remembering, reasoning, decision making, how the brain learns, retrieves and applies information, everything involving conscious and intellectual activity. So basic knowledge on this one would always give teachers a better edge than the other teachers, like who does not have any idea about this. So why neuroscience to teachers and educators? So imagine the situation: to have a student in a class with a teacher who really doesn't understand the implications of brain-changing neuroscience is like sending your car in for a repair to a mechanic who doesn't understand how the engine works. It is as simple as that. So how would this basic, like by introducing neuroscience, I don't mean that like every teacher should be a master in neuroscience. So that is close to impossible. But the basic knowledge in neuroscience, how would it help teachers? So first of all, we need to realize that we, as well as the students themselves, actually have the ability to physically change our brains and our intelligence. The brain becomes what it does. So it is all about brain. Like I also remember another quote, like there is nothing human in the world than the human brain. Understanding the brain and how it works is critical for our teachers, educators to become high impact and effective teachers. End of the day, every teacher in this forum or like every teacher across the globe wants to be effective in what they do. So how neuroscience would help teachers plan their lessons better, communicate effectively with students, and all those things are going to come in this session. So the major outcomes of the session would be, towards the end of the session, every teacher or every participant would be able to recognize the neuroscience behind pre-adolescence and adolescence behavior, which will by and large help every teacher, like be very effective in the classroom. Identify effective ways of communicating with pre-adolescents and adolescents. Like communication always becomes a big problem. And then, this would optimize exactly the learning environment given any situation to the teacher. The learning environment given any situation. And, with that, I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Akila Sadasivam. I spoke about neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience till now. How about listening to the nostrils of cognitive neuroscience from a renowned cognitive neuropsychology practitioner for about 20 years of time, Dr. Akila Sadasivam, basically a PhD graduate from University of Canterbury, New Zealand. She has also completed her MPhil from NIMHANS, National Institute for Mental Health and Neuroscience. She is the director for Samvit Psych Services Bangalore and Think Beyond Brain Care Solutions Private Limited. She has developed executive function training program to improve cognitive function in children and adults. And she has also launched brain development program named Rewire Brain Training. And she is in the field for about more than 20 years of time. And she would take us through and throw light upon the topic, which one is actually crucial for the holistic development of pre-adolescence and adolescence, whether it is experiential or experimental. So I am honored in inviting Dr. Akila Sadasivam to take over the session. Ma'am, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Team Rangila, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here today. Padma Priya, Shanmuga Priya ma'am, and Yashwant sir, thank you all very much for putting the whole talk today into perspective. It's really an honor for me to be here today because this is a topic that I'm which is very close to my heart, a topic that I'm very fond of, and something that I pursue with a lot of passion because teaching adolescents is very unlike teaching young children. Young children pretty much look up to teachers. Teachers are their entire world. For the first time, they see, another person outside the home as they step out of the home from, pre-nursery to nursery and then LKG and UKG, and then you have grade school. Up until middle school, whatever the teacher says holds good for them. And so, even though it's not easy, the challenges are not as many as while you're working with an adolescent. The reason being, up until that point, a child is willing to be molded by somebody he or she looks up to. And the fact is they do look up to teachers. I remember a point where my son, used to come home to me, UKG, he was very fascinated with his teacher. And every day he would come to me, and when we would do homework, at the end of it, he would look at me sort of in a very doubtful look on his face. And he would say, Mom, you know what? I think you're almost as smart as my teacher. Right? So that is the age where they look up to their teacher, and the teacher is the smartest being on the planet. As they move towards adolescence, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we'll discover that today, they start questioning everything. Because they're in that phase that they question, they can very easily ridicule, and they can pose a lot of challenges for teachers. Therefore, teaching an adolescent is not an easy task. And wherever I go, the most popular topic is, how do I deal with an adolescent? Therefore, this topic is very, very important for me. And I've included pre-adolescence as well, because as neuroscience tells us, sometimes pre-adolescence can be compared to children. Sometimes pre-adolescence is the starting phase for adolescence.
Akhila, are you going to change the slide?
I will change it. I'm not changing it just yet.
Okay, good.
Right,
okay,
yeah.
So thanks.
Yeah, do let me know if the change doesn't, the slide doesn't change.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And the adolescents, pre-adolescents on some counts are different from adolescents. On some counts are very similar to adolescents, and therefore we've clubbed them both together, right? So are we looking at experimental or experiential learning? What facilitates holistic learning? And that's the crucial part, right? So we are looking at what are the domains of cognitive abilities that are crucial, starting from age range of 11 up to 17 and then 17 plus. Are cognitive functions different in children versus adolescents? What are some of the unique characteristics of this stage that we as teachers need to be aware of, because that is what will either interfere or facilitate learning? How can we facilitate holistic development, learning, and something which is a permanent thing? Can we facilitate process of inquiry without that becoming an extreme form of rule breaking? Because I think many a times adolescents by nature want to break rules. Why do they break rules, and how can we facilitate this in a more, maybe in an experimental manner? And do we need to deal with peer pressure and interpersonal relations, or should we just leave it alone? These are some of the issues that I'm hoping we should be able to touch upon. Now, who is an adolescent? That's the first question that we need to ask. When does it start, right? According to Blakemore and Chowdhury, adolescence starts at the onset of puberty. So that's a biological stage. Around the ages of 11 in girls, maybe 12 in boys, is when puberty hits. And it then becomes, there are a whole lot of physical, biological changes that happen around this point. That period when puberty hits is when adolescence begins. When does it end? It ends when the person becomes independent. Biologically, it should end around the age of 19 or 20. But as parents, as teachers, as people working with adolescents, sometimes, there's a huge leeway. 20, 25, 30, maybe even at the age of 40, complete independence is not achieved, right? So according to Blakemore and Chowdhury, critical thinking, ability to self-reflect, becoming self-aware, ability to hold a lot of information in their mind, and learning multi-dimensional concepts is what defines an adolescent. Are my slides changing? I'm just making a check.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So in the last module 1, when we talked about cognitive development in children, we saw that there were psychological theories. I've only restricted myself to Erikson because that is what is relevant to this phase. Then we also spoke about cognitive theory by Piaget. Again, I'm looking at ages 11 to 16 and 17 plus. And we have a third theory, which is Elkin, which brings in another aspect that is known as social cognition, which is something which is very, very important for us at this particular phase to understand, because it has long-term implications. And as we move along, let's try and see how each of these theories, even though these are theories that have been put out in the 1950s, 1960s, 1940s, they still hold a huge level of significance for us. Erikson very clearly said, between the ages of 11 and 16, the primary core issue is that of identity. Who am I? Who am I? What am I capable of? What can I do? What should I do? How am I going to be able to, form my own life? That is the core issue that bothers an adolescent. Much of what we see in the form of anger outbursts, questions, self-doubt comes from the confusion of an ill-formed identity process. Thereafter, after the identity has been resolved to some extent, and according to him, it gets resolved by the age of 16 or 17, the individual then moves towards a very if the individual's identity is strong, they move towards intimacy. Otherwise, if there is confusion, they may move towards being socially isolated. Piaget's theory of cognition, on the other hand, does not make this distinction between 11 to 16 and 17 onwards. Instead, they say from the age of 11 upwards, you have the formal operation stage, where, if you remember from earlier, it stopped at concrete operational stage at the age of 10. From 11 upwards, they have formal operations where the capacity for abstract thinking, reasoning, problem solving gets, it's introduced at this age, and then it slowly starts getting refined. By the end of adolescence, they are on par with adults as far as abstract thinking, reasoning, and problem solving is concerned. Elkind, on the other hand, gave two very, very important concepts. One of imaginary audience and two, personal fables. Imaginary audience refers to the fact that it's a very strange thing and it happens a lot in adolescence. Until that time, not much, it's not evident very much. For the first time, the adolescent becomes very conscious of what other people think of him or her. The imaginary audience concepts indicates that wherever they go, adolescents believe that other people are looking at them and they're laughing at them, or they might find fault with them, and therefore whatever they do it because they want to make themselves presentable and acceptable to the other. So this may not be really true. Not everybody has the time to look at what you are doing, and there's so many other people, in your classroom maybe, or in a bus, but all adolescents feel all eyes are on me 24/7. That is what imaginary audience means. And as people who work with children, especially in the classroom, this becomes very evident, because those are the people that the adolescent wants to impress. I need pure acceptance, right? The personal fable concept talks about this adolescent believing that he or she is capable of taking on the world and is a superhero in his or her mind. Therefore, they will reject authorities. They want to take risks because they believe they can defeat death. A lot of accidents, road traffic accidents, seem to suddenly spike at this age, largely because of this concept of personal fable. So even though this theory was questioned significantly by a lot of people, subsequently Elkind made revisions in his theory. However, it continues to be true that both imaginary audience and personal fable are things that we see day in and day out. We'll keep talking about this. And once that stage of 17 or 18 is completed, as the person moves or approaches closer to adulthood, perspective taking in a social situation becomes important. What is the other person thinking or feeling? That is what perspective taking is all about. I'll come back to perspective taking when we talk about social cognition, but we're going to keep talking about all of this. So in short, if you put all of these theories together, what we're really seeing is, at the core, we're seeing self-identity of the individual. With this and physical development, the individual is very self-conscious. Peer acceptance is of primary importance. No matter what you say, it does not matter what your friends think. Nobody thinks poorly of you. They're not going to listen. They believe that peer acceptance is what will, so being the cool kid, being popular, being accepted by friends is what is most important. Logical thinking is at its peak. By this time, most of the cognitive abilities, we're going to be talking about executive functions in the following week. Executive functions almost comes to, a process of almost complete development at this phase. And they're capable of, phenomenal levels of thinking, reasoning, and abstract thinking and decision making. Therefore, it should be that their academic functioning should be at its best at this point. But you and I, from experience, both know for some reason that doesn't happen. Because they have this whole thing of questioning, questioning rules, questioning authority, they seem to have problems in this estimating the risk. They indulge in high risk taking behaviors. So drugs, experimenting with alcohol, maybe smoking, maybe relationships, interpersonal relationships, and breaking rules. What will happen if I come late to school? If the rule of the school is you must have buttoned your shirt right up to your collar and your neck, they for sure will leave the first two buttons unbuttoned because they want to see what will happen if they can break the rule. Can I get away with it? And that gives them a significant high, right? Then comes social cognition. Social cognition is in its initial phases of development, has not reached adult proportions yet at this point, and they have significant trouble looking at things from your perspective, right? So, all of this we're looking at and trying to say, what does this mean for me as a teacher? How can I understand what's happening to an adolescent? But do you really know what is happening inside the head of an adolescent? Let me show you. This is exactly what's happening in the head of an adolescent. There are so many thoughts going on, so much happening. None of it is related to what you and I are really concerned about. You can see two small blobs here. This and this, I think, are of immense, significance for us. Communication skills, this tiny little island here, and then a small little island here which says memory for chores and homework. That is what we would like them to focus on. However, you can see that for them, rebellion, judgment, interpersonal relationships, heterosexual relationships, self-image, addiction, TV, all of this, and then this whole love-hate for parents that they have, that occupies the center stage of their brain. This is what social psychology will say, or this is looking at the insides of the head of an adolescent from an adolescent perspective. What does neuroscience have to tell us? And this is, this is something that shocked and really rattled me when I read it for the first time, but it helped me understand why adolescents who are seemingly so sharp, so intelligent, do such silly things that land them in trouble, right? Why is there such a huge divide between their capacity to think and rationalize versus the actions that they carry out? Many of times parents, two things that parents often tell us. One, that, when I go to my child with a problem, and my adolescent child, when I go to my adolescent with a problem, he or she will sit me down and talk to me about the process involved. But when the same problem he or she is faced with, for some reason, they're not able to solve it. What happens between, these two phases? Why is there a difference, right? And the second thing that they tell us is, I don't understand why my child becomes so emotional in situations. Now, there are three crucial things that we must know about what is happening inside the brain and how development really impacts what an adolescent does and how an adolescent thinks. And for the purposes of understanding, I've just labeled it. Obviously, the brain does not come in so many flashy colors. I've just colored it so that we can demarcate the lobes. And it's important for us to understand the front part of the brain, right in front of our forehead, and a little behind that, you have the frontal lobes. Then you have the parietal lobes, which is this blue section. Just above our ears is the pink section, which is the temporal lobes. And at the back of our head, directly behind our eyes, is the occipital lobe. Then the red portion is the cerebellum. And then you have the brainstem. Now, continuing from the brainstem on the inside, between the temporal lobes and the bottom of the frontal lobes, you have something known as the limbic system. And for now, just understand it as the emotional brain. The frontal lobe is known as the thinking brain, and the limbic system is known as the emotional brain. We'll come back to this again as we move along. 3 things, like I told you, that we must know about an adolescent. The first thing is, like I said, the orange portion in our previous slide. The prefrontal cortex is the seat of all higher thinking. Now, this particular region, along with the parietal lobes, which was in blue, what you saw last time, these 2 regions are going through a significant change in the form of myelination. I will explain to you what myelination is and why it is important. And this happens in the 2 regions which are responsible for attention, concentration, working memory, mental flexibility, goals-directed behavior, planning, problem solving, and mathematical calculations and reading, which covers pretty much everything we do in school. So the myelination happens in the brain and it's not yet reached the parietal or the prefrontal cortex. It's in the beginning of adolescence. The first thing we must remember. The second thing is there is a process known as synaptic pruning, and this results in a reduction in the gray matter in the brain. I will talk about, again, explain why this is important. Synaptic pruning is not a bad process. Just like how when we have a hedge or a plant, we have to cut the plant to give it a particular shape or to keep it healthy, all the extra branches we cut off. Similarly, the brain goes through a process of pruning the extra connectivity that it has. This pruning is what defines what will remain in the brain and what is forgotten. Between the ages of 1 and 2, synaptic pruning is what is responsible for learning of language. So in India, many children are exposed to multiple languages, right? So mother speaks one language, father speaks another language. If we introduce both these languages at this age, the child can learn it. However, if we introduce only one language, and then we introduce the second language maybe after the age of 3 or 4, the child struggles to learn that language even though one parent speaks that. And that is because of synaptic pruning. Use it or lose it is what will happen. And I'll come back to what that means and why synaptic pruning is important. So synaptic pruning is very important, and it happens across various stages. In adolescence, it occupies a significant reason because synaptic pruning happens in the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobes, and that again affects how they think and they behave. The third thing is that adolescents process significant amounts of emotions, and they're very strong compared to adults and children, which can have an impact on their social cognition, right? Let's look at each one of them to understand the significance. I'm trying to make it less biological as possible so that we all understand the implications, but then feel free to ask me questions towards the end of the talk in case you don't understand. Myelination is a process of this yellow fatty sheet that covers the neuron. So you have the cell body, which is your gray matter, and then you have the dendrons, and your axons, which is the connection to the neuron next to it. There is a gap between this neuron and the next neuron known as the synapse, and the electrical impulses from the dendrite goes to the axon, and through the synapse it becomes an electrical impulse. Sorry, it becomes a chemical impulse before it reaches the next neuron, and then it becomes an electrical impulse. For the electrical impulse to be strong enough to be carried right through the entire length of the neuron, myelination is required. It's a fatty sheath that covers the entire cell body, and that helps information to rapidly pass. So very quickly, within a matter of nanoseconds, it passes from one tip right through to the other, and that gets converted to a chemical transmission, passes through the synapse, and gets converted into an electrical stimulation, goes to the next neuron. That's how neurons talk to each other, right? Now, the myelination process starts from the back of the head, maybe from the bottom of the head, moving up the cerebellum, the occipital lobe, and then from back to the front, which means occipital and then temporal, parietal, frontal, and the last region to get myelinated is the temporal lobes. In adolescence, myelination has not happened in the frontal lobes. So even though the frontal lobe is functioning in full capacity, it is not myelinated, so they are a little slow to process information. Now, the white matter, on an fMRI, which is an imaging of the brain, fMRI or an MRI, this myelination shows up as a white body. The ratio between white cells and the gray cells have to be maintained at a particular level for information to happen and quickly and effectively. In adolescence, this whole thing gets goes haywire because of one, myelination, two, you have synaptic pruning. So you can see at birth they have very few neurons. By the time they're 6, you have millions of neurons. A whole lot of learning has happened, and around the age of 11 or 12, when puberty hits, that's when the pruning starts, and then the only what is used, only what is required will be retained as the cell bodies, which is your gray matter. The rest of it will be cut and discarded. So here comes the important part. The gray matter is at the peak, which is your cell body, which contains all the information that you need, is a peak at 11 years. From there on, there is a decline in the gray matter. And in contrast, you have the white matter, which is increasing because of the myelination happening. And this is most pronounced in the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobes, which means that if you are not going to use specific pathways in the frontal lobes, that is going to be discarded and thrown away. As a teacher, this has a huge significance, because if I'm not allowing my adolescent to think on a particular route, to use a particular ability, then the use it or lose it will determine which pruning, where the pruning happens, which network is going to be retained, and which network is going to be thrown away. So your experimental learning at this point should be such that it covers wide areas, provide questions for the adolescent to think of multiple topics, to experience it, to incorporate it, and therefore ensure that the pruning of those concepts does not happen. Because if it gets cut and thrown away, then it is use it or lose it. That is the mantra that we must remember. If they don't use it, they are going to lose it, right? So be it language, be it science, be it math, this is a crucial phase, starting from the age of about 11 for girls and 12 for boys. So there is a gender bias. Girls, they hit puberty a little earlier, and the synaptic pruning also starts a little earlier for girls. So the decline in the gray matter happens a little earlier for girls, and for the boys it hits a little later, towards the age of 12. And there is a huge change, but and this is not a linear process. That means all areas in the brain, pruning does not happen simultaneously. There is a lot more pruning happening in the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobes as compared to the rest of the brain, right? And this is our seat of intelligence. This is what we need for all the work that we do. By the time they hit about 17, 18, 19, this starts to plateau, the pruning and the myelination, and that then reaches a adult proportion, and then they stabilize, okay? And the third thing is, we have two, if you want to look at it as this, there are two parts of our brain. The prefrontal cortex has a very cognitive approach to life, which means thinking, rational, logic, all of that happens in the prefrontal cortex. As I told you, the limbic system, or the emotional brain, sits just underneath the frontal lobes and has high connections between the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes. Temporal lobes is the seat of memory. So you have your thinking and you have memory, and between these two, you have emotions, which is why most of our memories are tied with emotions as well. Sometimes a particular memory brings out a particular emotion because of its close association with the temporal lobes, right? Now, in adolescence, because of synaptic pruning and myelination, both of which have already crossed the limbic system. Remember, I said it happens from the base of the head and moves towards the front. So the limbic system is fully functional now. Pruning has happened, and the myelination has happened. Therefore, that controls the cognitive and the thinking and the rational part of the brain, where pruning and myelination has not yet been completed. Now, in a typical situation, when we are in an emotionally charged situation as adults, you have information that comes from the limbic system, like the amygdala and the ventral striatum, is then passed on to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, being the thinking region, will think about it and say, all right, this man is trying to push me to give a reaction. Let me control myself, because if I explode, if I react, I'm going to say something and embarrass myself. And then I'm going to, that is going to have a negative impact on my relationship with this man. He may be my boss, he may be my colleague, whatever. And so the frontal lobe dictates terms to the emotional brain, saying, hang on, boss, don't react. Just wait. Let us think and evaluate pros and cons. Let him finish. He's angry now. He's saying these things. He doesn't mean it. Let's talk about it after he's become less angry. In adolescence, so there is a top-down control to the emotional brain from the thinking brain. In adolescence, the thinking brain is weak. So in an emotionally charged situation, instead of a control coming from the top to the bottom, there is a control exerted from the bottom, which is the thinking brain, up to, sorry, the feeling brain up to the thinking brain, which means that in an emotionally charged situation, all logic will lose and will be thrown out of the window. The adolescent is only going to be thinking emotionally because that part of the brain is very strong. So the implication is that if you and I want adolescents to be able to behave in a socially acceptable manner, we have to appeal to their thinking brain, not to their feeling brain. But most of the things that we do appeal to their feeling brain, and that's where we are making things wrong. So, you know, I can give you umpteen examples about when this happens, but let's talk a little bit more about this. So if you, this pictorial representation, Sowell and colleagues have shown us this, that the prefrontal cortex is showing this kind of a sort of a linear development. But in adolescence, the limbic system, your nucleus accumbens, part of the limbic system, suddenly supersedes the development of the prefrontal cortex. So you can see this region, which supersedes the frontal cortex, and that then causing problems. So this has a direct implication on the social skills and social cognition. So in any social situation, I'm going to a party, how should I behave, right? So there are three components. You have a detection mode, you have an affective or a feeling mode, and then you have a regulatory or a control mode. The detection mode is who all are present. Is this a happy day? You know, is this a sad day? Is it a festival or a religious day? The biological significance, the detection mode will take over. The superior temporal lobe, the temporal lobes and the parietal lobes will take care of this. The affective mode, like I said, is part of the feeling brain. The amygdala, the ventromedial, the striatum, the basal ganglia will take care of what is the mood in the room. Is everybody happy? Have they lost somebody? Is somebody ill? Has there been an accident? The feeling brain will take care of that and process that information. The prefrontal cortex will take care of the regulation. Everybody appears to be sad because there has been an accident. I can see that somebody is hurt and they've all been, bandaged up. That's what the detection mode is telling me. So the prefrontal mode will say, don't be loud, don't laugh, don't make jokes, be serious and help whatever help you can do, offer that. So in any social situation, all the three have to function in coordination with each other. We already know that this part of it is a problem in adolescence, largely because the affective mode exerts influence on the regulatory mode rather than it being the other way around. And for an adolescent, if you look at what Elkin said, perspective taking becomes a problem, which means that, yeah, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it because I can sense, that my father has been hurt and I'm upset and I feel like crying. However, I don't know how my father is feeling. I also don't know what my mother is going through right now. My brother is in another country. He cannot come and join us at this hour of need. I don't know what he is feeling. So taking on the perspective of another individual is very difficult for an adolescent, because that again is regulated by the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobes, which we know has myelination and pruning happening. So there is a, so the control region is in the prefrontal cortex. The feeling happens in the amygdala and the ventral striatum. These two exert more influence over the prefrontal cortex. That's what this is showing us. So what are the implications for us as people who work with adolescents? One, if you can create an environment which is neutral as far as emotions are concerned, neutral as far as interpersonal tensions are concerned, then the adolescent can think clearly and logically, because they have reached a stage where executive functions are at its peak. However, you come into the room and you say something sarcastic to, oh, you've not even combed your hair today. And that is the end of your session that day. Because the moment you say that, you've appealed to the feeling brain of the adolescent. You have kicked in a process of automatic disobedience. You have kicked in the process of rule breaking and challenging authority. You have challenged their physical appearance. You have insulted them in the front of their peers, and your lesson is completely gone just on the basis of that one sentence you have done. Logic gets thrown out of the window and you've lost it for that day, right? Therefore, appealing to the thinking brain is what you should be doing. Remember, use it or lose it. If you don't want a bunch of emotional people, either angry and aggressive people or crying, whiny people at the end of your adolescent period in senior secondary school, let us use their thinking capacity rather than appeal to their emotions. I'm not saying, make them robots, but allow them to be able to think. And remember, they are slow now because myelination has not yet happened in the prefrontal cortex. Give them time to think, to react. Don't judge them at this point, but allow them to think rather than feel. Because the moment you give way for emotions, then that is the end of it, right? So maybe if you appeal to the adolescent, enter into a contract and say, I remember when I was doing my PhD, I had to do this assessment, and I was really desperate for cases. Ambitiously, I had said 10 children I'm going to do screening for, and thinking I'm in India, but at that time I was in New Zealand, and getting 5 people was a challenge for me. And so this guy was the 5th child that I was seeing, and he was an adolescent in every sense of the word. He came in storming and he was angry. And I got a call from my supervisor saying, this child is not going to cooperate with you, so you may have to consider screening somebody else. I was really desperate because this was the only child I had seen who would fit my criteria, and I wanted to make it work. So I requested my supervisor and the parent of the child to say, will you both be present in the room? Let me talk to him. And if he does not agree, then we will consider taking another child. So I brought him into the room, and then, he came as a typical adolescent, sat at the edge of the chair. He turned his face away from me. He was looking out the window, and he said, yeah, sorry, tell me, what do you want to say? What is it that you want? And then I said, I can tell you're very angry. So he said, of course I'm angry. You made me lose my playtime with my mates. Sure, my goodness, what a crime I've committed. So I profusely apologized, and I said, I understand. You want to be with your friends right now. However, I'm really desperate for, a child, and I need to screen for my study. It would be really nice if you could cooperate with me. We could be done with this in about 2 hours, and then you can go back to playing. However, if you still think playing with your mates is important, I will respect that. And then maybe we can look at me taking someone else, or you can come back on another day. And my heart was beating so fast, because what if he said, I want to go? I would not be able to finish my study. He thought for a very long time, and he said, well, I've already lost my playtime. You might as well do the assessment. I was so thankful that he agreed. But that negotiation is what helped, because I was not appealing to his emotions, which was anger at that point, but I was appealing to his thinking and rational brain, which then said that, okay, this lady needs my help. Maybe I should just get over and done with it and feel good about it at the end of it, right? Treating them with respect will allow them to again access those parts of their brain which are still functioning intact. and then they will be ready to do whatever you want, which means both experimental and experiential at this point will sort of become united, and that will help us to facilitate a better learning. Explaining to them why they behave so erratically, because a lot of adolescents are really confused. Why do I do this? Why do I ruin everything? Why am I constantly messing up wherever I go? Remember, self-identity is an important aspect for them. So they are constantly questioning themselves, and you have to help them understand what is happening. They all are reading, and of course the Google Academy is there to help them understand what is happening. So they know biology much, much better than you and I. We don't have to teach them. But if you talk to them about connecting this to what you're seeing in the child and allowing them to reflect upon it and express themselves without questioning them, not judging. Because remember, rule breaking is a part of growing up, and it's normal. Just like how lying is normal at age 3, rule breaking is normal for an adolescent, right? If you allow them to express it and say, oh, I get a high out of, not coming to school on time, or I get a high out of jumping over the school compound and going away before my teacher catches me. You allow them to talk about it. I'm not saying accept it. I'm not saying give them the permission to do it, but I'm saying help them to understand and connect this as a part of growing up, and help them to connect it with the consequences as part of, a group learning. Talk to them about it, see what the others feel, and then put it as, peer pressure, and then help them to confine to the rules. That way they will be able to do it willingly rather than because you are telling them or punishment is around the corner. They're willingly doing it, and they will make sure that their brothers and sisters follow it on their own. You don't have to do very much about it. Breaking rules is because they have to break those rules, shatter them, question them, and rebuild it and build up their moral values on the basis of what you are teaching them. Therefore, if you think of use it or lose it, at this point, your role becomes very important in trying to tell them, I'm not judging you for what you're doing, but this is my stand. They will learn to accept your stand, incorporate it in their thinking, and that then becomes use it rather than lose it. Therefore, this use it or lose it will help us to guide them. And it's much better that you do it, they do whatever risk taking under your guidance rather than them doing it all by themselves, right? So going back, all those 3 aspects, the pruning, the myelination, and the social cognition, are very important for us to understand why they do not have good control over their emotions. Appeal to their logic and deal with rule breaks. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is interpersonal relations. Everybody knows that this is the phase where either you have people who have already in serious relationships, or you have their friends who are pairing up and say, I think this guy is good for you, or that girl keeps looking at you at lunchtime. So they're constantly discussing heterosexual relationships, whether we like it or not. Interfering that is going to push them towards use it, which means they're going to keep thinking about it. They think you don't like it, therefore in order to challenge you, they are going to do it. So instead of pushing them for sure to end up doing something that will land them in trouble, why not you just look at that and say, well, I noticed that this is distracting you. I would much rather that you pay attention to your studies, but if there's something that you want to talk about, maybe you can come up to me personally and we can share about this. So the more attention you pay, the stronger that portion of the behavior is going to get. So maybe this is something you want to ignore. Just like how you may want to ignore their anger outbursts, you may want to ignore the fact that they're paying a lot of attention to interpersonal relations, and just stick to it's interfering with your studies, therefore I'm concerned. If you want to talk about it, I'm available. That would probably be a better way of doing it. Career choices, facilitate, open them up to as many options, let them experience it, because that's when they're going to know whether that's really for them or not. And I'm sure when we have a session on careers, that's going to come up more. But experiencing what a career, what does it feel like to be a teacher? What does it feel like on a day-to-day basis to be a software engineer? Allow them to experience it. And then for sure, they can take a better and informed decision whether this is what they want or not. Okay. So just to wind up my talk, as a teacher or as somebody who wants to be important in the life of an adolescent, we need to be like the mother eagle, right? Let me just wind up with this short story. The mother eagle builds its nest in very strange places, always at the precipice of a cliff. Why does it do that? Because when the hatchlings are born, it's undisturbed. It can take care of it without any prey, being a threat of prey. Once the fledglings are ready to fly, the mother gently nudges and pushes the fledglings off the cliff. If the fledgling is able to fly, she does nothing about it. But she's watching. And if the fledglings are not able to fly, she will swoop down, pick up the fledgling on her back, bring them back to the precipice, wait for some time, and then nudge them back out of the nest. That, I think, is a beautiful representation of what we should do. Those who are able to fly on their own out of our schools, which is the nest, well and good. If they are not yet ready, we nudge them, we push them, we watch. If they fall, we swoop them, bring them back up on our backs, and push them again when they are ready. I think that would be a phenomenally good relationship to have with an adolescent. Thank you very much for your patient learning, and now we're open for discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Akila Sadasivan. I request, like all the participants to be on mute, like where we are going to give you opportunity to ask queries. So meanwhile, like let us follow the etiquettes of the group, like online class, where like you can raise your hands, we will unmute you so that, like you can post your questions. Before that, like I would like to kind of briefly summarize, like what Dr. Sadasivan has told us. Ma'am, it was fine that like we had to concentrate or we had to know the three aspects, of the brain, like of the cognition and all. And, like to takeaways would be like appealing to the thinking brain, not to the emotional brain, like treating children with respect, creating a neutral environment concerned to the emotions, and it is better that they do, rule breakers, they do it with the teachers' guidance rather than without them. Like all these things would help teachers, like plan their lessons. All these things would help teachers foster learning in their classes even in a better way. So now that like you have thrown light upon all those things, I do have a situation in which, when teachers would like to try experimental or experiential learning strategies in their classroom, so it is very, natural that, like these teachers will have to put these children in groups. So grouping children, trying to impart some kind of meaningful learning. So here, like these children, when they are in the group, they have the tendency of fighting with each other. This, like outbursts of anger among children. So when I had to give an experiential kind of learning to the children, it is that like the teacher has to give enough freedom to the child. Now, without freedom, like learning can't happen. So how would a teacher handle outbursts among students in a classroom?
Right. So, very important question, because like I told you, they are emotionally reactive at this phase, and emotional reactions are going to be very, very common. So we need to act as facilitators at this point by allowing them to foresee what can be the problem. Sometimes we force them to be in a group where they probably are strangers to everybody in the group, and we do that deliberately because we want them to get along in the classroom, right? That is the whole purpose of putting them in a specific group. But they may view that, remember, they have a problem in perspective taking. So they may view that as punishment from your side. Therefore, maybe having a prep talk, allowing them to give opportunity to express their concerns even before the group project starts, and talk about who's going to play what role, and then setting up a time where they can have another discussion with you midway to make sure everything happens. So there has to be a constant switch between your monitoring, which is your experimental, and allowing them to handle things on their own. Some groups are very cohesive and they can manage beautifully on their own. Some groups are happy to let one person do all the work and they all sit behind, and a person who's very high on not so much on leadership skills but on academics and with the thinking capacity and logic and reasoning will take the entire group under his or her wing and solve out all the problems. But some people struggle to be either a leader or a follower, and those are the groups that you may have to facilitate. So your role of being the mother eagle with those groups will become very important. Allowing them to express what they feel, in front of the other person and giving the other person an opportunity to explain and clarify should happen. And if it happens organically in a non-judgmental manner with your presence as a facilitator, I'm sure most of the issues can be sorted out.
That's fine. Wonderfully said, ma'am. Like taking on the perception of another individual, like is very difficult for children at this age. That is what you did mention, and that is a valid point to be taken and to be noted also. So as a teacher, like if I had to trust my perception upon these children, like it is going to it is going to become very difficult for me. So now that these children at this age are not expressive, they might not be very expressive. They might have some interpersonal issues, So do you think that we as teachers should interfere into their interpersonal issues, address them? How is that? How do you answer that?
Right. Interpersonal issues are a very, very sensitive topic. And at this stage, it's a very crucial thing. You can neither ignore it, nor should you interfere in it head on. So there are one of three ways in which it can be handled. If it's, a group dynamic, and it happens without people being aware of it, then you can address the whole group and allow them a free session where they can bounce off ideas. So a shy person can sit back and listen to the other and maybe feel, okay, this is what they're saying. And, I have misunderstood them even without, sharing in that session. A second way could be that you pick and choose only those people where you feel there are interpersonal issues, and you can have a separate group, not in front of the whole class, but maybe you set up a time for when they discuss with you, and then you give an opportunity for both parties to bring it up. And the third way in which it can happen is it has got nothing to do with the group, but it has got to do with one person who maybe is going through something in his or her own life and cannot share it with other people. And therefore you provide an opportunity for that individual to share. However, having said this, I know it sounds idealistic, and we all know that adolescents won't trust us and they're not going to share. We have to respect, and at the risk of them saying, I don't want to talk about this, we have to say, well, I respect you, but at the same time, should you feel a need, I'm there for you. And we have to wait till they are free to come up to us and talk to us. They will talk to us if A, they can trust that we're not going to share it with anybody else, and B, if we're not going to judge them for it, then they will definitely share it with us.
Brilliant, ma'am. So we do have a question from one of our participants, Ms. Uma Mageshwari. How to create interest in reading for my 8th standard girl child? I would also like to kind of rephrase this question, what would be the best way to motivate or to ensure motivation to study and follow good study habits, ma'am?
Okay, so study habits, we have to figure out what is the rhythm of the child. There are several ways in which I do this. One, why are you studying? Why do you need to study? I lead with that question, because that sets the tone for motivation. I'm studying to get my mom off my back, otherwise she's hounding me, is not a good enough motivation. On the other hand, I'm studying because I feel good when I get these marks, probably is a stronger motivation. So my first initial discussion with the child would be to talk about what is your motivation to study. The second thing that we do is keeping the child's study pattern. Some children are very good at studying, up until 11 o'clock in the night. Some children are better when they study at 5 in the morning, right? So look at the pattern of the child. I know a lot of people think that waking up in the morning is the best time to study, but it doesn't always work for everybody. I know many children who comfortably like to study in the afternoon when the whole house is sleeping, right? And because there is no disturbance, there is no noise, I'd like to study in the afternoon. Figure out from the child what is the best time that the child is most productive, and two, get a sense of what is the child's day like. Maybe Friday and Thursday the child goes for Sanskrit classes, Monday and Wednesday the child has violin, and Sunday and Saturday the child goes for swimming classes, right? So Tuesday is a free day where nothing happens. And so figure out what is the schedule of the child. Once you do that, then you set up a timetable where you give enough breaks and you give time for resting and recreation, and then allow the child to try it out. You try this out for a week. If it works, then we'll stick to it. If it doesn't, come back and let's relook at it. Also, keep a journal and tell me why you were not able to meet this time constraints, right? And helping the child to pick what should I study when, and what should be, like if I'm doing physics now, can I, after the break, can I come back and do something as heavy as chemistry, or should I do something light like English? So, these sort of discussions would really help, and trust me, more than 80% of them are willing to at least do 60% of what we want them to do.
That's beautiful, ma'am. Like children at this age, like they cannot process information. At the same time, when we can specify it, put it as a kind of homework that they can do, like they'll be able to follow it up. And as parents also, like will be for parents also, it would be greatly helpful, like in getting to make child invoking interest in the child to read or to follow good study habits. And
Sure.
one quick last question, ma'am. So this would be the most important question. I believe, like how do teachers effectively handle disobedience?
Right. Disobedience, most often I find that teachers get very upset about it, and there is anger from the teacher's side the moment there is disobedience. Understandably so, I don't blame a teacher for getting angry when her or his lesson plan has been interrupted. However, with an adolescent, if you deal with disobedience with anger, you've lost out on account of their limbic system being hyperactive. So the best way to deal with disobedience is to set rules. So there are, you set the rules. Once the rule is clearly explained, then we talk about what happens when that rule is broken, what are the consequences, and what happens when the rule is followed. Once the consequences are set, then you also have in place that maybe I have 1 or 2 warnings for each classroom, that when they're about to break the rule, I might warn them and say, I think you're crossing the rule. Let's remember the consequences. Give them time to change gears, and then you continue without anger. Despite that, if there is a rule break, isolate that particular individual who's breaking the rule, allow that person to come and, isolate them from the rest of the group. Do not let them escape the class. That is the most important thing, because most often they break rules to disrupt the class. They break rules because they don't want to be part of the class. So maybe the negative reinforcement could be, you will not be escaping. You continue to be in part of the class, but I will deal with this once I finish the class. And then the, whatever reinforcement, the contingent plan has been discussed, will be put in place. This way, then you're tackling the most, problematic rule breaker. Sometimes if you know that there is just 1 or 2 or maybe a group of people who break the rule, you may want to preemptively break the pattern by predicting, okay, these guys are going to break this rule. Let me stand next to them, make them repeat the rule, and I'm with them when whatever the activity, so that they don't get an opportunity to disrupt the classroom. So you can make a preemptive strike and say, I'm not giving you a chance to break the rule. It works really well. Couple of times, then they know who's the boss in the room, and then they will not wag their tail as much. They do respect you when, maybe sharing a laugh once in a while will not help. Will not, be bad. I often, children come and tell me that, we enjoy being in your class because you laugh a lot with us. Even when we break a rule, you don't take it personally. And I think that is really crucial. Don't take it personally. It's not you, it's them. Allow them to see it as their problem, not your problem. And then, don't allow them to escape from the class.
Thank you, ma'am. Power-packed, very informative session. And now I would like to open the session for question and answers. Participants with any queries can unmute yourself and post your questions or ask your questions, please. I have quite a few questions on the inbox, chat box. Many children is very angry while seeing the other children learning well.
Mm-hmm.
How does it happen, and how should it be corrected? It's like, Miss Sashmita has posted this question in the chat box, ma'am.
Okay. So maybe this child has either a learning issue, or probably he's not using study time effectively. So having an individual session with the child, figuring out why he is not able or she is not able to meet the target set, or maybe has very ambitiously set targets for himself or herself. So reviewing the target set, finding out what is the hindrance, and then allowing the child to experience some kind of success with that would be one way to handle it. Another way would be, is this child's self image, identity threatened because of certain personal experiences? Maybe understanding a little bit of that and helping the child develop a positive self image, so that studies is not the only way that I can form an image of myself. Maybe I'm, being compared with my sister who is a super brilliant student, and therefore I feel I'm growing under her shadow, and I don't want to be. Allowing the child to explore his or her own potential, to look at so beyond studies, there are so many other skills. Allowing them to explore that and gain a positive self-image would really help strengthen their self-image.
That is also wonderfully said, like all the other questions. We do have another question posted, like Ms. Padmapriya, how to make a child respond quickly to a question, maybe sounds, that's what parents really expect.
Right. It's very hard because why do we want the child to respond quickly? Because we think that's an indication of how well the child has learned. What if the responding quickly is compounded by anxiety? What if the responding quickly is compounded by self-doubt? What if, like I said, the myelination has not happened in the prefrontal cortex, and a lot of times young adolescents need some time to respond. They can't respond immediately. So if you give them a stress-free 5 seconds to relax and then respond, maybe that quick response will happen. So instead of forcing a child to respond quickly, I think we should look at as what are the hindrances to that happening, and see if we can clear those hindrances. That way we are facilitating the environment for a child's response.
Thank you, ma'am. See, most of the participants, they don't want to voice out, rather, they would like to ask questions in the chat box. Here is Mr. Mohammed Asif Hussain, who has questioned, how can we bring out adolescent from the fantasy world, and how can we make them understand reality?
Right. Fantasy world is a real worry, because a lot of times that happens largely because they are so invested in social media and they're playing a lot of games. And now the compounding problem is they're all watching anime, and they believe that anime, I don't know how many of the adults know of anime, but these are series which are online, and they are watching videos, they are reading these anime books, and they believe that that is the truth. And that it's so captivating that it draws them into this world of fantasy. Therefore, giving them a non-judgmental environment where they can actually interact and taste success of an interaction in a real life situation, it should be a carefully constructed experiment to ensure that this person initially tastes success in a social situation. Break it down into a small session, allow the child to taste success, then expose. So maybe one person, the teacher and the child interaction, make it a positive experience. From there, then maybe one other child in the classroom and the teacher, and slowly start expanding their social interactions. As they taste the success of in-person experiences, they are going to come out of the fantasy world. They go into a fantasy world because that's a safe place, they think, where they are not watched. Remember what Elkin said, that this imaginary audience, that is why they go into a fantasy world. We need to make sure that reality is not so bad.
That would really suffice, ma'am. Beautiful. I have Mr. Mohammed Salim, who has raised his hand. I would like to, I would request Mohammed Salim to unmute and ask your question, sir, please. Before which you can unmute yourself, sir. If you had to ask any question, please do unmute, sir. Mr. Mohammed Salim.
He's already unmute. He should be ready to ask.
Yes, sir. We are all ears. Please, sir. No, I don't have Mr. Mohammed Salim voicing out. So let me have one more question. Like there are quite a lot of questions. Let me select one question from which I mean Dr. Akhilesh Sadashivam would be able to answer. Why does an adolescent think his parents don't understand him or her, and the peers do well? Like Miss
Right.
Jyoti Kalia, right? Fine.
Right, right. At this stage, more than 95% of the adolescents will say, "You don't understand me." To be honest, we don't understand them also, because most often, even if we want to understand them, we don't accept them the way they are. The peers are going through what they're going through, and so they feel there is a lot more acceptance among peers, and they're willing to look at things from the peers perspective rather than from the parents perspective. More than 95% of parents have told me, when the friend says exactly the same thing what I say, they're willing to accept it, but not when I say it. Because for them, peer acceptance is of great importance, and two, they believe you are outdated and you don't know anything about their world, which is to a large extent true, but it doesn't mean you don't have the intelligence to project into their world and see. But most often we don't take the trouble. If, however, we are able to address their concerns and ask them to, appeal to their logic and say, I think you're placing a lot of importance in what your friends are saying. This is what I believe. You think about the pros and cons of both of these, and then let me know what you decide. Most often they would make the right choice. But the risk is that they may make a wrong choice. And then are you willing to then say, okay, I'll let you try it out. Come back and tell me what the consequences were, and then we will talk about this. So you have to switch between experimental and experiential, because using one exclusively versus the other, you're going to lose the adolescent. For them, peer acceptance is the ultimate at this point.
Great.
Yeshwant, we have Mr. Sir, yes, sir, Rajendran, sir.
Yeah, I have one question, and also it's someone posted, Sasmita.
Sasmita. She's a student. She has asked, how should I control myself and not allow me to get addicted to Android phone, Facebook, and the social media, etc.
Okay, here it is. Aguila, before you start, I recently, just a few days back, I saw some suicides in Tamil Nadu. Parents were trying to control some couple of kids, right? Got suicide. The kids was always on the phone or something. Right. Unfortunately, the parents were poor working people, working in farms. They cannot understand what the kid maybe is trying to study. I don't know, trying to figure out first time and all this, right? So we have one side, we have fully educated parents. They also have a challenge with kids all the time in the phone. Another side, there is completely uneducated parents, little educated. They're also dealing with this kind of problem. Suicides are happening and things. Maybe I like this question. Maybe if you can answer that, will be. Sorry, Yeshwant. Sorry to interrupt. I thought
no issue, sir.
No problem.
Like even I was about to read that. Meanwhile, I had one participant who is like kind of raising his hand for some time. I thought like I'll allow the participant to speak first. Let me give Mr. Hector some room for him to ask his question and then post his question.
Please proceed. Yeah, this one interruption.
Sure.
Mr. Hector, you can unmute yourself and you can post your question. Hector. Fine. So I don't find Hector. Ma'am, we can go ahead with this question, ma'am. Since like a student,
the question is how to help an adolescent come out of gadgets. If you straight away say you're on social media all the time, you're on your phone all the time, they're not going to accept, because they feel it's only 1 hour, it's only 2 hours, rest of the time I'm studying. That is not true, right? So this is what I do most often when adolescents come to me. I said, you have a book with you. Just enter into that book whenever you pick up your phone, start time and end time when you put it down. And then at the side of it, what were you doing on the phone, right? So it could be phone, it could be whatever. So they monitor their own behavior. And then at the end of it, they will come back and, they don't even have to show me the journal. But they have understood for this week, Monday to Saturday, I have been on my phone on an average for about 8 hours. In those 8 hours, 6 hours has been on social media and the other 2 hours has been for class or research purposes, right? Then we have a discussion. So they may, actually it might be 8 hours on the phone for only social media and 0 hours for research, but they may tell me, 2 hours for research and 6 hours. I'll accept it. I'm not going to question it, right? But in my heart of heart, I know that that may not be the entire truth. Then we talk about, is this acceptable to you? The child may say, I think it's okay. Is it acceptable to your parent? The child may say, no, my mother's always complaining about it. Then what do you think is realistic? It's a bit like your drinking or alcohol or drug addiction, smoking, drinking, and drug addiction. Being on social media is a form of addiction. We have to deal with it this way by maybe reducing it down. Without their consent, it is not going to be possible. So you set a time limit, and most often when I make a timetable, I make enough time for them to be on social media because it's important for them to be connected with their friends. So we give them some time to maybe, half an hour before dinner, they can be on social media. And half an hour as soon as they come back from school, they can be on social media. But the rest of the time, the phone is given away to the mother. It's kept with the mother while they are studying. So we built in a lot of checks. When is the time when you're actually reaching out for your phone? So they may say, maybe in a class when the teacher is boring, my hand automatically goes to my phone. Or maybe mom asks me to study and she goes down to the kitchen. That's when my friend messages me and I get tempted. So we allow them to look at their own patterns and come up with ways in which they can deal with it, and then bring in the parent and see how they can, support this process. It works really well.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope, Shashmita, this would be of great help to you. And I have Mr. Hector Raj, who has posted his question here. Ma'am, is school phobia genetically determined?
School phobia, as far as I know, is not genetically determined. It's normal for a 3-year-old to be afraid to go to school. However, older children, if there is school phobia, we don't call it school phobia anymore. It's called school refusal. School refusal can happen for n number of reasons. It usually is a sign that something is not okay in the school environment, and we need to explore for that. Is there, an interpersonal reason? Is there a problem with the teacher? Is there a particular subject that the child is having problems with? Is there learning disability in the picture? What is it that is causing this? Or is the child being bullied? Is the child being threatened? There are so many things that can go wrong. We need to explore. Ask the child why will really, really help. There is no genetic cause for this, but it surely is a sign that something is not okay, and it definitely warrants further exploration.
Thank you, ma'am. And Hector, sir, you are on unmute. If you had to clarify, you can post your questions, sir.
Ma'am, I have another question.
Sure.
If the limbic system does not function, is hypersensitive, does it lead to any sort of intrusive thoughts in adolescents?
Yes. If the limbic system is overactive, you're very right, and that's a brilliant question actually. This is thought of as one of the reasons why you can see a lot of emotional disturbances that are very commonly seen in adolescents: anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, depression. In order of importance, it would be depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorders. These are very, very high because of the overactive limbic system, and therefore many of adolescents are at risk for developing very severe mental health disorders, and we need to be able to help them sort out these issues so that it doesn't go into something more severe. Overactive limbic system definitely is a risk factor for most of these emotional disorders. Anxiety, depression are two very common ones.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Hector. Ma'am, since we are also kind of running ahead of the time limit, time constraints, I would like to state all participants that Rangila team is closely following all your queries, and all your queries will also be answered into your inbox. Before I wind up, I just had to definitely ask this question, this is a parent, with much of concern. Ms. Dhanalakshmi has asked, how to handle adamant children?
Right. Adamant children means they are not listening. Children who refuse to follow your rules. If we remember in the last session, we spoke of the 3 C's, the clarity, consistency, and contingency. That as a point system works very, very well. By adamant, you mean, there are certain things that you want the child to do and the child does not do. Let's assume, you want the child to have a regular study habit, to go to school on time, and to, you know, make sure there is enough time for whatever maybe the religious practice in the house, let's assume. Then you put these three as important aspects on a star chart. For a younger child, it could be stars or a smiley face or a sad face. For an older child, it could be points. Most often, if it involves chores, I have also encouraged parents to include pocket money because it teaches them the value of money and make it contingent on their behavior. So you, and this is not bribing, this is not blackmailing, this is set up in, you know, consultation with the child. When, you know, they're setting it up, the child, make sure that the child is in a good mood, parents are in a good mood, everybody agrees to what the do's and don'ts are, for what the child will receive points, for what the child will lose points. And then after a certain number of points are achieved by the child, that can then be exchanged for something. This usually is a very good motivator to get your child to do what you want them to do. Adamant, because they feel they don't get anything by listening to you. So when you make it contingent on some kind of a reward system, and also by a blanket refusal leading to them losing a privilege that they have, usually the behavior comes around.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. You know, like, thank you for your time. Thank you for the ideas. I really feel elated, and I hope like every teacher in the forum would have been elated. Though we have crossed the time limit, we still have 130 plus participants on board, listening very patiently to yours. You know, like, this is a really power-packed, informative session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
And to the participants, you know, like, kindly bear with us if you are not able to take your questions and answer all your queries. Team Rangila is closely following you, and they will get back to you with all the answers for your queries. Now I request Mr. John Paul, Assistant Vice President from Team Rangila, to propose the vote of thanks and also to give you an overview of the upcoming sessions. Over to you, Mr. John.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Ashwin, sir. It is my privilege to give a vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, everyone. I thank Madam Shanmuga Priya, a principal, SKV, for giving a wonderful welcome speech. Thank you, ma'am. I thank Mr. Ashwant, Director, KJG School, Ooty, being a moderator for this wonderful session. Thank you very much, sir. I thank Dr. Akila Sadasivam, Director, Think Beyond Brain Care Solutions, for being an informative and a wonderful session. Thank you very much, ma'am. And to all the participants who participated from various locations. I, John Paul, on behalf of Rangila Neuro Adaptive Learning Private Limited, on my own behalf, convey deep regards and thank everyone who presented here. Thank you, everyone. I also wish to express our gratitude to our CEO, Mr. Rajendran, for organizing a wonderful and informative session. Thank you very much, sir. And I would like to thank the entire Rangila team to make this session live. Thank you, team. Today, we have completed the module 2. So upcoming webinars are module 3, next Sunday, September 20th, topic, importance of executive functions and its impact on the developing brain. So I would like to invite all the participants to log on next Sunday, 5:30 p.m. Follow-ups, today module 2 presentation slides download link will be sent to all the participants in next 3 days. Today, session recorded versions will be uploaded in Rangila YouTube channel soon. I request all the participants to attend their survey and complete in next 4 days and to get a free test codes. Certificates will be given to all the participants before Friday, 18th September 2020. And we look for consultants, freelancers, advisors who are interested to work and partnered with Rangila. So keep in touch at hello@rangila.com, or you can contact our Associate Vice President, Padma Priya, at 9941727729. Thank you all. Have a good day. Please register for the next webinar. Invite your friends. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think thank you,
Rajendran,
John.
sir, over.
Yeah. Thank you, Aguila. It's a very great session.
Thank you so much.
I learned myself. I have twin kids. You know, I have twin kids. They're in 12th grade now. I have a lot of challenges as well. I learned myself. It's all. I feel like I'm a certified neuroscientist. I'm sure that people on the phone probably definitely, because these are all common things, but these are super specialty. We don't take time to read or learn. So I definitely learned this session very well today. Thank you so much, Aguila.
Thank you so much.
Would you mind giving like a 30 seconds to 1 minute overview on your next executive function that will help audience inspired for next session? Would you mind giving a quick overview?
Sure. So executive functions is a concept that is catching a lot of fire right now, because most of if you look at children and the concerns that parents have or teachers have, are those who are outliers or children who are lagging behind in class. And earlier we used to look at intelligence as a way of estimating why these children are lagging behind. But now in the field of neuroscience, we know that the concept of executive functions is so crucial for us to know, because it is a very, very strong predictor of academic success and of somebody who is wanting to take up a career. Long-term outcomes can be very, very significantly predicted on the basis of strong, weak, or dysfunctional executive functions. So executive functions is an umbrella term with a set of key core cognitive abilities, which if they are adequate or average or above average, then it means that the child will beautifully sail through school. On the other hand, if there is dysexecutive function, then these act as roadblocks for a child's success. The second part, which I'm really excited about, is neuroscience says that these are easy fixes. If we identify them early through maybe a process of screening and then provide inputs for them, and there are various modules that we can talk about in the next session, how can this be fixed? And it can be quite easily fixed, maybe by taking a simple brain training program or doing a few things in class. This can be improved, which then changes the developmental trajectory of a child. And the training can happen from as young as a 3-year-old up to maybe a 70-year-old individual. And that's the fascinating thing about the brain and its response to intervention. So improvement of executive functions is dependent on brain plasticity. We can improve brain plasticity, which then can have a significant impact on the holistic development of the individual.
Great. Thank you so much, Aguila. Thanks for the preview. And again, Yashwant, you've done a fantastic job on moderating, taking questions. You moderated very well. Thank you so much, Yashwant.
Pleasure is mine, sir. Thank you so much for having given me this opportunity, sir. Thank you.
Right.
I would also like to express my gratitude to Akhila Sadasivan for having taken so much time, like being patient in answering all the questions. Thank you so much, ma'am.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And of course, I like to thank Sanmag Priya, who filled in shoes at the beginning to kick up the session. With the last minute, she was gracefully accepted our request. And thank you so much, Sanmag Priya, for your help from this. She is a principal from the SKV, Tiruchengodu. Also,
pleasure, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, go ahead, Sanmag Priya. Yes, thank you. And yeah, I mean, I found Sanmag Priya is, she's an excellent leader. She conducted so many environmental awareness, rallies in the, so beyond education, right, and things. So she's a well-rounded leader. We are very thankful to Sanmag Priya as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And also I'd like to thank my team, Padma Priya, John, Anu, Aarti, and Subramaniam, putting together this program. We're looking forward to seeing you next week, the same time. Aguila is going to lead the session, executive function. I'm also looking forward. That's my, that's my curiosity. Please spread out our news, and I'd like to see more participation. Please extend the invitation to your colleagues. Also, please register. If you are not already registered, please register. You will get a certificate. Registration is important so that we know how to get you the certificate. And also we continue to look for, as John said, we continue to look for people from our team to participate as a freelancer. We are going to kick off the practice very soon. We are going to expand our company national level. So we continue to look for advisors or freelancers to academic counselor or career counselor kind of role, please provide referrals and things. You can send a resume, or I mean, it's a freelancer thing. We are not looking for, asking you to switch a job. Freelancing, mentoring, all things. If you are available capacity or psychologist on the call, you can send us an email to hello@rangila.com, or you can contact us on the phone number. You can find our website. Feel free to engage. This is a journey for next 2 to 3 weeks. So we're looking forward to you, all of you. And thank you for joining today. Have a wonderful rest of the happy Sunday. Thank you and take care. Thank you, Aguila. Thank you, Ashwant, again.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Artificial intelligence-based youth development analytics platform. Let us make your life colorful.